20 years. Yeah, because this year would be our 50th year. So at least 30 years, but then even.
Thank you all for coming. You want to come take your food and grab some bourbon? I don't know that we have, we haven't really talked about any kind of format for this, but I'm assuming people have things they want to say and remember. And unless anyone has an alternative suggestion, I say we just start with whoever feels like speaking on this bittersweet occasion.
Well, okay, I'll talk. I'll break the ice. I should say who I am. Yeah, okay. My name's Alan Steele. I've been a customer at this store since you got started, and a Bob's store. I moved to this area 21 years ago, so how later after that was
almost the same time.
Almost, it was only couple of years ago. So we bought a house in Whately, very, very close to the original Troubadour books, and I just loved the fact that I had a good, not just a used bookstore, but a good used bookstore like 5 minutes from the house. And Bob was, aside from our real estate agent, was the very first person in this area who we met. And so Troubadour for a little while became, I felt like second home. They got to the point, I write science fiction and I collect science fiction, and Bob and I were calling that corner of the room the Alan Steele corner there. I could tell anybody, I knew the inventory in my head, I don't know if I have any great stories about Bob. I'm sure that stick out of my mind, except that he was one of the warmest and most decent individuals I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of books. But on the other hand, he could talk baseball with my wife and drop just on the top, who has very little interest in books but a great interest in baseball. And so he was absolutely delighted to talk about that aspect with her. But a thoroughly decent person, and damn, I miss him.
I'll say this. I was thinking. I have the Whately book.
And you are?
Oh, I'm right. I'm Barbara Smith, bookseller. Robbins. Yes. And Eugene and I had for 25 years. We had the Whately Book Center. So Bob moved in. I don't know. I forget how many years after I came on board. Just a few. We found out we had our birthdays just about a year apart. We were both Pisces. And we got, how you share your life story, little bits and pieces. I shared that when I was younger, I'd hop freight trains. Throughout mainly Canada, in the Western Canada. And he thought that was cool. And what do you know, but a few months later, around my birthday, he gave me this wonderful little book on hobos and freight trains, which I come across, and it's the way we booksellers do express our interest or our thinking of people, and I still have the book. I mean, obviously I'll have it, as a remembrance. So that was a thoughtfulness I remember about Bob, especially in his early years.
Aside from that, maybe I'll tell the one story that came up to my mind. It came to as you talking about this. I was going to the bookstore one day, and I would buy two kinds of books from Bob. I'd buy the books that I read for pleasure, which are science fiction and mystery, and then I used it as my research library, because like this bookstore, there was a lot of everything, and this would be the first place I learned to go to, was to go, if I'm researching a certain subject, first stop would be Troubadour books to see if Bob had a copy. So I was researching World War II, and I found a copy of Mein Kampf. And I went, oh my dear God. And I went to him and said, Bob, I hate to break it to you, but you're Jewish. And he said, yeah. And I said, you're selling a copy of Mein Kampf. And he said, yeah. This is Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. Yeah. Don't you have any kind of regrets or anything about this? I mean, and he said, and he said, it is not my job to police what people read. It's not my job to decide what should go in and out of a bookstore on the basis of philosophy. If somebody wants to read Mein Kampf and they want to, and I have a copy, I'll sell it to them. I'm not going to tell them how to read it. This is their book. And I thought that is that's extraordinary, and that's extraordinarily wise, because I know a lot of booksellers who would not, if somebody brought in a copy of Mein Kampf or any number of different books of this nature, hate lit, they would send it right back out of the store again. And Bob decided, no.
I have a question. Did being Jewish affect Bob? And I mean, did Bob have a Jewish upbringing at all?
No, he was not bar mitzvah. Our family never went to synagogue, and the connection was tenuous at most. I don't know whether deep down he had some deeper sense of identity. I don't think so. I think he might have mentioned that at some point.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
This is a man who's in a photograph dressed up like the Pope.
But he's also the model for Moses.
Moses, yes, right.
Which I think that bespeaks our local shortage of Jews more than
But I think that he always described himself as a humanist.
yeah,
You know, and that he
obviously-
was very, to use a term, and it's originally in a Catholic, you know, where he took ideas from everywhere.
Yeah, and he would seem to be enthusiastic about all religious
Yeah.
ideas except maybe Jewish ones.
Yeah, that was the only one that's the only time, in fact, I think, now I think about that the thing with Mein Kampf was the only time, and I knew that ever came to that ever came up in conversation.
But boy, did he know some great Jewish jokes.
I remember one.
Come on, stand up. Here we are in the Catskills.
He did tell me this Jewish joke about, I'm going to botch it, of course, but it's these three Jewish guys are standing outside of a church, and they look up and they see the church has something that says, like, convert to Christianity today and we'll give you $500. And one of them, you know, Shlomo said, you know what, I'm gonna go and tell them I'll convert and I'm gonna get the money. And he goes into the church and he disappears for like an hour, and they wait, and finally he comes back out and his friends say, well, did it work? Did you get the money? And Shlomo says, is that all you people ever think about?
He had a million of them. Well, I would like to say something, but since I'm running the camera, I guess I'll have to come over here. Patty, why don't you do this?
And who are you?
John Riley. I'm going to tell a story about how I met Bob. I have Gabriel Books down on Market Street, and Bob would come in. I started in 1993. Bob would come in and he would buy stacks of books, 40 books at a time. And Patty, my wife Patty, was there running it, and she would come home and she'd tell me this guy comes in and he buys books like a crazy man. I go, well, good, that's great, it's $200. And one day I'm working there. I would work on Saturdays only back in those days. Bob comes in and he's buying all these books, so we got to know each other. I finally got to talk to him. I said, Bob, why are you down here? What brings you, other than buying books? He says, well, I'm coming to see my shrink. I come to see a shrink because I buy so many books. And I said, look, Bob, I've got a great idea for you. We're going to cut out the middleman. You probably pay the shrink $200. Give me $200. Let's get rid of the shrink. Why don't you start a bookstore? Then you can buy all the books you want, and nobody will think you're crazy. And about a week later, he said, I'm going to start Troubadour. So that got him started. But yeah, we had a great relationship, both my wife Patty and me and Tony and Bob. Hi Tony, we're filming this for you. Bob also had a very good relationship with my kids, Gabriel, Ben, and Kofi. Today is the anniversary of my son's passing, and we had a memorial, thank you Bob. We had a memorial for Ben at the Unitarian Center 19 years ago. And Bob stood up and said some really great things about Ben, how Ben had helped him bring books and carry books and help him stock the store. Ben was a big guy and had carried books for him and had been very helpful in helping him get his bookstore started. He also was good friends with my son Gabriel. Gabriel loved sitting around hearing Bob's stories. And also with my daughter Karina and my son-in-law Marcus, who were very good friends with Bob. So yeah, my whole family is very sad to not have Bob in our lives anymore. We really enjoyed watching sports, being together, eating, doing everything that we did. And we were just really pals as far as book dealers went. We really had a real soulmate as far as that went. We both loved books. And we both kind of made fun of antiquarian book dealers. It's like so fussy, the old bindings, all that stuff. He loved books that were alive. If they were old books, they were alive for him. Dante, Pound, whoever it was. Those books were living books for him. He didn't need the old, fusty books. And that was, I really shared that with him. So we really had a kinship as far as that went. And then Bob moved to Santa Rosa, my hometown. My freaking hometown. And we would talk on the phone, and I said, Bob, we're going to come out there. We're going to go to all the wineries. We're going to go to all the oyster bars. We're going to have a party. It's going to be an unending party. We're just going to party all the time. And we were planning on going out there this spring or this summer. And unfortunately, that was interrupted by Bob's passing. So we'll go out and see Tony. And we'll do the same thing.
I guess I'll speak. I actually prepared some remarks.
Thank you.
Sorry to be so formal, but it's sort of how I am. So I'm Bob's sister. My name is Peggy Crane. My maiden name was Willig. On February 6th, you lost a friend, and I lost my brother and only sibling. I'm the only one left standing in my nuclear family, the only one still around to remember how things were. Bob and I grew up in one of those unhappy families that Tolstoy knew so well. Many of my family memories are painful, but I'm okay with retrieving them and feeling the pain, because no remembered pain is worse than losing Bob. He deserves to be remembered, even by a sister who wasn't always there for him, who didn't understand him, and who fears she may have failed him. I remember when Bob came down with chickenpox. He couldn't have been older than 5. Our mother held him in her arms on one of the twin beds in our room, and I was on the other. We stayed together like that all night. I knew how sick he was, and I tried to distract him by making jokes and singing songs. Not sure it worked, but it made me feel good to have a role to play, that of protective older sister. As a child, Bob seemed more nervous and more vulnerable than I was. He was also born with the lion's share of raw brain power. While I was good at niceties like spelling and French, he was gifted at math, and his overall intelligence shone like steel. He was also a bold adventurer. When we moved to the house on Davenport Street in 1956, he was eager to explore the wilds of the neighborhood, while I was content to stick close to home. The future traveler to points south and to far-flung overseas destinations was already discernible at age 6. You may be surprised to hear this, but in his youth, Bob had strikingly natural athletic ability. It's true, right? It's a little surprising, but I always envied the games of catch with our father, who'd scoff that I threw a ball like a girl. But Bob really was good at it, and soon sports took root in his soul as something beautiful and meaningful and exciting and joyful. "What's an RBI?" I'd ask, and my eyes would glaze over as he launched into an explanation that felt like serious business, too serious for a dreamy teenage girl to fathom. Yet I could sense how much pleasure it gave him to share something as precious as RBI statistics with his clueless big sister. He also loved animals. Before there was a Winnie or an Emmy or an Oscar, there was Poochie, a stray dog Bob found when we lived in Puerto Rico in 1955. Both of us loved that little terrier, but Bob's love was truer and more passionate than mine. Our parents wouldn't let us bring Poochie back to Washington, which hurt like hell. Then there was Henrietta, the most memorable in a succession of cats that Bob loved and fed and nurtured. Once again, the child is father to the man. You can glimpse the future animal lover in the boy who came into the world with a huge loving heart. Was Bob too sensitive for this world? I've often thought so. Sometimes being with him could feel like being in the presence of a wrong nerve. Most of you are no doubt familiar with the substance abuse issues that dogged his life, starting in his late teens, thwarting his potential in conventional terms, but expanding his consciousness in a creative, destructive way, and taking him to the outer limits of human experience. He tended to admire rebels, and I guess he became a rebel himself. He was Dionysian and I was Apollonian. He played the blues harmonica while I became a classical singer, and the list of our dissimilarities goes on. But on a deep level, Bob and I shared a certain fierce morality that manifested itself in our politics. We were both hugely influenced by our respective Marxist experiences, as well as in our attraction to religion and even in our interpersonal relationships. There's no question in my mind that we sprang from a common moral source. Bob and I cared deeply about each other, but I can't say we were especially close as adults. And yet I was intensely proud of him, especially for what he accomplished as the creator and owner of Troubadour Books, the greatest worldly expression of who he was, both spiritually and intellectually. You know, even more than I do, what that bookstore was all about. You shared and still share his love of books and ideas, music and literature, folklore and storytelling. He was a master storyteller himself. A few years ago, I suggested that he record some of his stories. I offered to help him do that. I hope to submit them to a radio station, or to a theater producer, or maybe to the Moth. I thought I was being a helpful older sister, and that this project might save him from his demons. How presumptuous of me. By then, he was too far gone, too vulnerable, and too depressed to follow through with such an ambitious undertaking. I'm not sure whether he would have made more of an effort if I had stepped forward earlier. I'll never know. What I know is that the world is poorer without Bob's stories and without Bob. My heart is with you all today, and especially with Tony, whose grief is streaming across the country from Santa Rosa, and who is with us in spirit. Rest in peace, darling father.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you.
Well, I will give you a somewhat later family reflection. Bob's younger cousin, younger by only 2 years, but really his younger cousin. My brother lives in the Los Angeles area, in Santa Monica, and just made my phone buzz because he knows this is going on right now, and he's desperate to find out what's happening. But he sent a text that he wanted us to read in Bob's memory. So I'm going to do that, and then just give a couple of personal reflections. I will say that when you talked about this Bob religious, you have to remember that his paternal grandfather was an atheist. So that was part of what went through the family. But I will say that Bob and Tony did come to one of our incredibly scaled down seders at our house a few years ago, so there's still a little bit of connection there. Anyway, for my brother Jimmy, who was 11 years older than I and 8 or 9 years older than Bob, I kind of knew we'd be soul brothers or soul cousins from the day Bobby was a couple of weeks old, Almost all you could see in the infant's crib was his nose. A bulbous, prodigious proboscis that in fact was very cute. As we all know, he grew into his nose, but what many don't know is that as Bobby grew into his nose, we grew into a special relationship starting from almost the beginning. My brother Jimmy recalls Bill Willig the Clown, Bob's persona, giving out free stuff to kids just because. During my brother's law school tenure in Washington, he was there for 3 years. They made it to every Redskins game. The sports tradition started and continues. And then after that, they spent 3 months in New Orleans gathering signatures for a cable TV license, but it was basically two guys on the street having fun, and it's quite a town to have fun in. Uncle Marv never got the license, by the way. And Jimmy claims that Bob taught him golf. Our passions for food and sports, politics and movies and literature drove most of our lives, and I hope I had some impetus in those directions. And whatever he felt like doing, he would do 100%. Clowning, working oil rigs, organizing, eating, teaching film, running a bookstore, or whatever it was always 100%. In the end, younger cousin Bobby was a big influence on me, though he was my junior by 8 years. The political activism, gourmet food appreciation, and the Q tours, discussing world affairs and many other issues and values. He was the only one that kicked me in the ass to get me started, and he'll always have a special place in my heart. And we went through this a few times with my brother. He really feels badly about not being able to be here, about the loss. So I'm younger by 2 years, but really the younger cousin. And a couple of recollections of Bob, mostly from ancient history. One on the golf. So we would see him in Washington, D.C., Thanksgiving or holiday season visits. We were in Philadelphia, they were Washington, or they'd come up to our place, and just a couple of little kids doing whatever the heck little kids did. But we'd also see him down in Miami Beach, where our family owned a hotel, actually a second one after that. So you'd have once a year, maybe every year, the winter vacation down in Miami Beach. And there's a par 3 golf course in town, and I'm some pre-adolescent whatever, and don't know how to play golf, but what the heck, I'll go do this. And Bob would regale me with stories of his success at golf. But, one thing that really stuck with me one day was he told me about how he hit a wedge shot. The ball was like, I imagine, sitting this far from a 1,000-foot stand of trees, and how he would get back and manipulate the club and do this and get it over the trees onto the green. And I don't know why that stuck with me. Not something I could ever do. But he told it well.
I played golf.
Yeah, played golf back then. And then, of course, there was the year that he was working at the Newport Hotel up in North Miami Beach, which his father owned, and he tried to organize the workers against his father. Yeah, we all remember that one. One more recent memory. During the course of his illness over the last decade or so, I had the occasion to arrange for his admission to Bay State Medical Center, where I'm on staff, and his attending physician was actually my division chief, or my boss, who happened to be the ward attending for a good chunk of that time, and he would just tell me how much he enjoyed sitting and talking with Bob. He sort of knew the bookstore, but just the discussions that they'd have outside of the realm of medicine about life and literature and things of that sort. And then there was a day that I got to walk into the room while Bob was walking across the room this way with the flap open in the back. So you have the rare glimpse of your cousin's you-know-what. Derriere. That's a personal story. So back in the Miami Beach days, one winter vacation, I'm not sure if I was 12, 13, somewhere in that realm. I'm out frolicking in the Atlantic Ocean, and I get stung by a Portuguese man-of-war. Wraps around my arm, gives me one of these. I had blisters a few days later and all this. My God, it's a man-of-war. I'm going to die. This is terrible. And it did hurt. So I get hustled back into the hotel room and put into bed, and my mother's saying, just stay here, here's an ice bag, it's going to be okay. And Bob comes in. Remember, he's 2 years older, so he must be 14, 15, somewhere 14-ish, and he comes in with an issue of Playboy. He doesn't show me the pictures, but he reads me a story. And it was not a prurient story. It was actually a very sweet story. But I still remember, laying there, oh my God, it hurts, I'm shivering, I'm going to die. And there's my cousin reading me this 3 or 4 page short story out of Playboy, which was a mysterious publication. That was just a lovely piece of literature, and obviously made an impression on me. So, definitely my older cousin, and I miss him. I'm sorry for our loss. Thank you so much.
My mind is still warping about the thought of Bob playing golf. I cannot imagine this.
Yeah.
Has anyone here seen Bob dance?
Yes.
Oh,
He
yeah.
told me that he was an
Yes.
incredible dancer.
Yep.
The most incredible dancer I have ever known, and I danced with him a lot.
Yeah?
Oh.
Well, what?
So let me,
Yeah, what is,
Yes.
Great
give me some
segue.
sense of what?
it's a great segue. Hey, Tony. So my name is Diane Stoller, and I was born 27 days after Bob in 1951, both of us at George Washington University Hospital in Washington, D.C. We went through at least, and Peggy, you may have to help me on this, because I can't remember exactly which years he was at Marais and which years he was at Murch. But wasn't he at Murch for some?
I'm not, you know what, I don't think so.
Well, I went to Murch, maybe Bob didn't. And Bob went to Marais for at least all or part of junior high school. Marais was a private school in DC. And then we both went to Woodrow Wilson High School, same year. And oddly enough, we both ended up at NYU. Only Bob was there for 1 year and I was there for all 4. Because so many of the kids at Woodrow Wilson had come through the same elementary, junior high, I mean, it was just, you know, we all knew each other, even if we didn't know each other well. And Bob and I, again, we were familiar with each other because we were all familiar, but we didn't really run in the same circles. Which at this point in my life, I really regret. So it wasn't until our 20th high school reunion, which took place in 1989, that Bob and I encountered each other again. And it was a Bobbish encounter. I don't know what it was, but something, you know, from either side of the room or the table or whatever just went going. And I was living up in New Hampshire. I'd been living in New Hampshire since 1976. Bob was still in the DC area. And so we started traveling back and forth to visit each other. And when I was down there, Bob would always, of course, have music going. And I want to speak both to the dancing and the sports, because it was the same. I mean, we're talking about the same, all I can call it is grace, okay? There was a video made, and I don't know if any of you have seen it. Peggy, I'm guessing maybe you have. And it was on a VHS tape, which I probably still have somewhere in a box. But it was a sports-oriented tape where, I don't even know who was filming them. I don't know if it was Chuck Kogod, I don't know if it was Alan Perper. I mean, for those of you that are familiar with those names, it's because we all went to school together. And there's Bob on a basketball court. And there's Bob pitching a football. And there's Bob with a golf club. And, you know, this was at a time where Bob was, you know, carrying around a fair amount of weight on his frame. And it was nothing I had ever seen before in him. Never saw him do any sort of sports in high school. He wasn't on any of the teams. But it was jaw-dropping to watch him. The grace, the elegance, the timing, the style, and his dancing. I'm not sure who was being reincarnated into Bob's body. His sense of rhythm, his movement, his total freedom within space. And when I would, it was stunning. It was moving, it was stunning, it was mind-boggling. And when we were hanging out together, and I would go down to DC to see him because my family was still in DC, he would take me to these blues and jazz clubs that were in parts of town that I would have been reluctant to go even as a native Washingtonian at high noon. And we would go in there at 11 o'clock at night and very often be the only Caucasian faces in there, and everybody knew Bob. Everybody, from whoever was making the drinks behind the bar to whoever was playing the drums on stage or the sax or whatever, and Bob is sitting there, as Bob has always done, holding court.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times throughout my life with Bob in one form or another did I have to keep shutting my mouth. So, you know, we always remained in touch, even, you know, certainly after he and Tony got together, and after they, you know, moved out to Santa Rosa, I was in even more contact with him, just more frequently. I didn't really like what I was hearing in his voice. I was getting more and more concerned for him, but also knew that there wasn't, other than just staying in touch and trying to be as supportive as I could, there really wasn't anything that I could do from here. So when, you know, Tony called me with the news I just did not want to hear, while it saddened me profoundly, it was not a complete shock, just because I knew how he was struggling. And so, you know, all I can do is hold fast to the knowledge that he's not struggling anymore, that he's not in pain, at least not on this plane. And I like to envision him dancing his socks off to wild music and playing the harp when he sits down to take a breather. So thank you for letting me.
Thank you so much.
and share all of that.
Beautiful story.
Yeah.
The film you're talking
Yeah.
about, I believe, is called Saint Beau on Sports.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it is. And there's another one too. There's the barbecue.
Aha.
In Praise of the Pig.
In
Yeah.
Praise of the Pig.
Okay, that one.
I have that
I've
somewhere.
never seen either, but he told me about them so many times, I can picture them.
I mean, the things that he told me he did during high school, in terms of like just getting in a car with, I don't know if it was Kogod or Lonnie.
Lonnie.
Probably Lonnie. And like just taking off for the South or for Kentucky or for Alabama. Not telling your parents, not showing up in class, nobody knew where they were. Guess what? There were no cell phones. And again, more of the, you know, that's why I say, you know, we didn't exactly run in the same circles. There's no way I could have even conceived of doing such a thing.
Bob's stories were just so incredible.
Absolutely.
I remember one story about going to the South, and he said when they got to town, they went to the bail bondsman first. Because they knew they were going to get into trouble. I mean, who knows if this was made up, but you know, it's pretty believable.
Name?
Oh, my name, Karen Randall. And I can't even remember when I first started going to Bob's store. I moved back to the area about 20 years ago, and my partner, who's more shy than I am, started taking me. Like, we would regularly go. Like, it was like a Sunday afternoon, usually, that we'd go and hang out, and Bob would hold court and tell just stunningly beautiful stories of his past.
What was your mom like? I asked this partially because I.
Have fun, Peggy.
Yeah, I mean, let me just say I got a lot of, I've been dealing with Bob's books for a decade, and at some point I found a 2-volume set, I think it was Philo, and it was inscribed, apparently, unless it was a gag, to Robert Willig, who has earned the respect of his mother, and then signed. It was the coldest thing I had.
And what was the book?
It was like some
Philo Judaeus.
2-volume book about Philo, maybe?
And your mother would have sent that to him?
Philo.
With that inscription?
That does not sound.
Okay, well maybe maybe one of his friends wrote it as a joke or something. That's what I was like, who was this woman who tells her,
That doesn't sound like her.
all right, well, what
What was she like? Let's see. So quick bio. Let's
Yeah.
see. My mother was the second youngest of 9 children.
Wow.
They were, I think, born in Philly, but by the time she was 13, had moved to New York. 3 of the children died in childhood. That was, turn of the last century. My mother was born in 1914, so her older siblings were born in like 1902 or something. Anyway, my mother went to college for 1 year. Now, remember, her older brother, maybe you don't know this, her oldest brother, Richard, was a member of Roosevelt's Brain Trust. He was an economist, and Roosevelt recruited him in 1938, which was sort of toward the end of the New Deal. And so he was a whole other generation, really, and there was my mother. She didn't get to finish college. I think she wanted to, but the family couldn't afford it. And then, of course, the Depression hit. She became a publicist, a PR expert. Back then, this was when the woman's page was a thing. And my mother did a lot of PR for like women's undergarments and baby care and cosmetics and you name it. She was apparently very successful and very dynamic. And I actually have a scrapbook of her stuff. So she was creative and imaginative and really talented. And then she got together with my father. Well, she had met him earlier, and then they had a wartime correspondence, having not seen each other for years. But they fell in love again through this wartime correspondence, and they got married the minute he got back from World War II. He had been in South Pacific. So they got married in 45, had me in 48, and Bob in 51. And she never really worked again. She became a kind of lady of leisure. She had her dynamism and her creativity, but she channeled it into charity work and into being a hostess, I would say. And she was an expert shopper. So it's hard to say. She's a lot of I would say from Bob's teens on, my mother had a series of health disasters. Breast cancer, which she ultimately died of, metastatic breast cancer. Had all kinds of things, and I think that Bob felt this tremendous pull to take care of my mother. Even though she didn't require his care, that wasn't what it was about. So I think there was this sort of darker relationship that they had that I wasn't really part of. I had already kind of left and gone off to New York and all that stuff, so.
Because you never talked about her at all. I've heard stories about your father,
Mm-hmm.
but never your mom.
So how old was, when did, on,
1988.
okay, so he was older.
Yeah. So he must have been
In his
37.
30s, yeah.
I was 40 at the time.
I think for me, I moved up here from having only lived in. I grew up in New York, and I lived in a lot of cities, and we came to this. It's a nice area. I love the area, but I was only meeting like parents who, as a genre, are really boring people, and I felt like I was suffocating in this town, and then after it took me a few weeks to find Troubadour. And it was like this dose of, of character, of, someone who would say things, like how calling call girls made him a better person. Because you had to accept whoever showed up at the door. And, nobody else was saying this stuff to me. And there were so many stories like this. A lot of off-color stuff, sure, but then also stories about the kind of kid he was. I don't know if people know the Miles Davis story, where he went to see Miles Davis when he was like 14 at 3 a.m. in some black nightclub, and all his friends chickened out, and he just took a cab over there, and he sat down, and the scene, like he tried to order a drink, and the waitress was like, "No way, honey." And in the end, like Miles wasn't going to go on again, but then the guy's like, "Oh, I'll talk to him," and they pointed to little Bob, and Bob waved. Just like, this 14-year-old, whatever it was, 15-year-old.
Bob had chutzpah.
Yeah, and apparently Miles just burst into laughter and got up there and played some music.
Wow.
He managed to get Miles Davis to come back on stage and play. That is bloody amazing.
What about the Howling Wolves story? But basically it boils down to Bob was in Chicago, went to this club, Howling Wolf was there, and he was just like, "Hey, Wolf." But he was there for a while, and then one of the other guys was like, you need to blow. He's like thinking, "Oh, am I supposed to play the harmonica?" No, blow like the wind. Did I tell it right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
How about some back from his drug smuggling days when he and Lonnie were bringing coke into the United States, and Bob would dress up like a Hasidic, rabbi, and they would put the drugs in the satchel or the luggage. Bob would get all dressed up, and nobody would bother Bob. He could walk right across the Miami airport, and who's going to bother that guy? He's just bringing in like a suitcase full of drugs.
From where?
Colombia. They make the finest.
And what happened? Eventually Lonnie got caught?
Lonnie went to federal prison, yes.
Now, who was Lonnie? Was the high school friend?
Yeah, lifelong friend.
Lifelong Washington.
Except Bob was furious with Lonnie in recent years because of his right-wing politics.
Yes.
That friendship, I don't think, healed, unfortunately.
I don't think so.
What? He thought of Lyndon LaRouche as being a Marxist?
I don't know if he ever retracted that view.
Yeah.
I didn't get near it. I had my own Marxist experience more as like an Orthodox Trotskyist. But I just didn't wanna get near that with him.
All right.
But I think he might have gone through a phase of understanding that this was a kind of madness.
You know, I would not have even remembered Lyndon LaRouche's name if you hadn't mentioned it just now. But again, this would have been 89, 90, and Bob had come up to visit, and we were taking a walk that evening. And not to be disrespectful in any way, but Bob was pontificating about Lyndon LaRouche. And I was horrified. And I just looked at him, and I mean, we hadn't even spent that much time together at that point. And I just looked at him and I said, "You like Lyndon LaRouche? You're supporting Lyndon LaRouche?" And as I think has already been referred to here, Bob's sensitivity worked both for him and against him. And he stopped in the middle of the road, and it's dark out, and he turns to me and he says, "Boy, you sure know how to kick someone in the stomach, don't you?"
Yeah.
What did my jaw do? What? No. I thought I was just asking a question. I thought I was looking for information. I wanted to understand better why this person that I just adored was drawn to this particular politician. I never did get an answer because he took such offense or heard such criticism and judgment in my voice. And I'm sure there was an element of that, but it wasn't intended, you know. I mean, it was more, you know, more of a.
He might have been the 27th person who'd asked him that same question.
That is
Well, that's also, I mean, that's the other, I mean, I'm not sure, I mean, that's right up there with golf, kind of bending my mind a little bit. You know, I can't imagine Bob being attracted at all towards Lyndon LaRouche.
You could have played golf with Lyndon LaRouche.
Whoa.
Lyndon, he want to hear a weird
Lyndon
thing?
LaRouche everything he knows about golf.
Lyndon LaRouche died on the same day Bob did.
Oh, no.
Is that true?
He was 89.
That is strange.
It is very weird.
I'm worried that LaRouche died, I didn't put two and two together.
Yeah, I just mentioned that to Alan Perper, and he goes, so what, John? What's that got to do with anything? I said, I thought it was kind of weird.
I think it is kind of weird.
Yeah.
I also think it's kind of funny.
Yeah, there certainly is an irony if you get, but I still just, a golf-playing LaRouche follow-up. Right.
Are you gonna get up and leave now?
Marx is all about contradictions.
Yeah, I'll say, yeah, okay.
I wanted to say something about the Willig side of the family, some of them, and you'll recognize this, I don't have to name names, but we have, we have cousins who, both of whom were involved with religious cults. And if you look at LaRouche as a kind of cult leader.
He is a cult
He
leader.
is certainly a cult leader and pretty out there, but you know, there have been crazier cults even than him. So I think there is a certain kind of person who can fall prey to a cult. I think that unfortunately, even when you're out of it, its effects live on and they are destructive, and I think Bob may well have just, you know, really paid a price for having had that experience. Because, you know, LaRouche is very paranoid and kind of engenders paranoia in his followers.
But also, you know, I can see in a way, now that I think about it a little bit, because, yeah, paranoia, sure. I mean, this is a guy who thought that Queen Elizabeth was a drug smuggler. but he was also...
What's wrong with that?
Yeah,
The opium wars in China, England was bringing the opium from Afghanistan to addict the Chinese.
but you know something that I say, I mean, one of my... The only thing that Lyndon LaRouche and I had it all in common was that we both supported space exploration. He was a major proponent of space exploration. LaRouche was an utopian, a fascist utopian, but he was an utopian. So that would be where I would see the attraction coming in there.
I think LaRouche started off as a Marxist.
Right.
You did?
Right, and then he went off.
Yeah, and I think maybe that was. I mean, it's clearly. I mean, this is what you were saying. I think Bob, in some way, regretted being white and rich. I mean, he seemed to identify much more with the working class, and then most of his, you know, certainly a lot of his cultural proclivities ran toward black culture. And I remember, I mean, one interesting thing that has stuck with me is that when we would go to crummy restaurants, he would tip like 40%, and he would say it's not their fault they work at this restaurant. If she was, you know, whatever, you know, if we were in this expensive city restaurant, then the 20% would be this amount. And so he was, you know, he was always trying to correct these kinds of little errors.
That's the moral part.
Yeah.
So, my name is Laurie Cameron. I heard about Bob's bookstore before I moved out here. I was teaching in Cambridge, and one of my students said, "Oh, when you move out there, you've got to check out the Troubadour." So, hi, Tony. So I did, and I put my name on his mailing list, and he used to send out these postcards with stories on them, and so it was soon after I moved up here, and that was 20 years ago, and one of them is if you wore red shoes, you'd get 20% discount. So I'm like, whew, I happen to have a pair of red high heels. So I put them on and I went up to the bookstore, and I proudly went up and I said, "My shoes!" And Bob says, "Now that's what I'm talking about." So Bob, these are for you. But you know, we all know how Bob told such great stories, and he was very supportive through the end of my marriage, and just he was just a great guy, and his stories just, you know, they just fed my soul. But one thing about Bob, as good a storyteller that he was a great listener. So, rest in peace, Bob.
I was thinking about his generosity. Sam was talking about the tipping. And I mean, the book that he gave for me and a lot of other stories. And then there are his Christmas parties. Yes. I mean, I don't think I'd had, what was it, well, there'd be roast beef I'd have maybe once every 10 years, except at Bob's. And, you know, just all this rich, wonderful food. Though I remember, and I know I've told Eugene or someone, that I remember one time going and saying, "But where are the vegetables?" and it was either Tony or Bob that said, "We don't believe in vegetables." But those were very, very gracious, generous dinners. I met some interesting people. We danced also. We danced. I do remember having fun dancing at those.
But I think excess is
with the
part of
family.
what his whole being was. And it was whether he was
Excess.
doing drugs
Yeah.
or the parties. Like he, I mean, he had this wide range of food. I mean, he was very universal in his taste, you know, except like he and I would go book scouting. And, you know, we had similar views on a lot of the music we liked the same, the politics. He really didn't talk. It's very interesting because I specialize in labor, social reform, politics. Kind of casually mentioned LaRouche, but he never really brought it up. And when he was moving out to California,
I must have traumatized.
there were still books in the house that he'd gotten through, and Sam had gone through them, and there were still things, and he said, come. And there was a whole area, I have maybe 20,000 pamphlets and paper things related to, radical issues. And then there were all these piles of LaRouche, and he wouldn't let go of those. Those were really valuable, But in terms of like this excess, he had like taste where like when we would go scouting, so we would talk food and but he would have to, and I think this was a precursor to the diabetes, he would have to stop at every 7-Eleven and buy like a whole bunch of swill. He'd be buying like Cokes and Wingdings and just all this crap, and I thought this is just like in contradiction. And then for one of the parties though, this was he had taste specific things. So he knew a place in New Jersey, central New Jersey, where one of his friends was exiled out there from DC, and he lived out there, the New Jersey Pudge.
Jersey Putz.
Putz, yeah, the Jersey Putz, And we were going to meet him at this place that made submarine sandwiches, because they made the best submarine sandwiches that Bob had ever had. So I drove out with him. I drove him actually out there, and we got these incredible submarine sandwiches. And they, there was family members that made bread somewhere 40 miles away, and then they made their own hot peppers. But he'd have these specific places to get really cool stuff, and then
He had them all
you had to
over.
go.
He had them up and down the East Coast. I mean, if AVs,
Yeah.
if AVs was still in existence, I had already decided I was going to get them to ship pizzas up here for today, so that, at least, all right, here is a genuine, bona fide piece of where Bob used to sit and eat.
White pizza, right?
And the white pizza. And sadly, AV is not with us either. But, it was an institution. It was an institution in DC, and I guess what I want to say is that Bob is institution in life. But everything that you're saying, exactly right. These places and the stuff and the excess, the expansiveness. He would, when he first started coming to visit me, I lived underneath a small blueberry in East Cupcake, New Hampshire. He would open up the trunk of his car, and he would make 2 or 3 trips with all of this stuff. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean, it overwhelmed me. It seemed thoroughly excessive and over the top to me. It made me uncomfortable. But, where does generosity, where's the line, between genuine generosity and something else? And,
Yeah, there's been so many times I ate with him where I was like, where are the other 6 people we're ordering for?
I have to go.
Bye, Alex, thanks for coming.
I still have a wonderful Pendleton. I have a wonderful Pendleton blanket, that he gave me probably back in 1990. He loved Pendletons, absolutely adored them. Had favorite jewelry stores. Until the mirror itself started to corrode, I had a beautiful, wooden, handmade wooden mirror, face mirror, until whatever the silver backing on the underside of the mirror starts to go.
Well, as we were coming in, my wife Marlene here noted one of Bob's great joys, gargoyles.
Yeah.
Yes. He always
And they
had
were
them.
all over the store.
They were all over the store, and there was a place that we went a couple of times. It was, I don't know if it's still there, but it was on Newbury Street in Boston. And it was at the same time that it carried ephemera, very, very old ephemera, and maybe some books, and it sold gargoyles. All right, it sold gargoyles, gargoyle mirrors, gargoyle whatever, but gargoyles. And the floor, there were dead leaves all over the floor. So it was like you were walking, and it was very dim.
Graveyard.
And so it was like you were walking, stuffing leaves down a path, you know, in France somewhere, you know, some back muse or something. And he would always go there to check out the gargoyles and sometimes purchase.
Yeah, I think that place finally went out of business.
Did
Believe
it?
it or not, that's not a business model that
What?
can really.
You don't like leaves?
But I have a bunch of gargoyles still. One thing I was thinking about is this is apropos of Bob as dog and animal person. Bob used to speculate as to why dogs liked us. And he had these really far-flung ideas that they were really, you know, emissaries from, you know, the divine that were trying to teach us how to be loyal and good and selfless. Like something he lost, you know, sleep over, trying to figure out.
That's so Bobish.
Yeah.
It is so Bob.
And I had the different.
Was he serious?
Hmm?
Was he 100% serious? Or was it like a playful kind of?
You know, I don't know. I mean, there was some whimsy about it, but I do think he thought there was, you know, something going on with the, you know, with these superior animals that were living amongst us in his mind. I always thought it was the opposite. He didn't. I thought we were like their femme fatales. They liked being, you know, our hands or something. And even though they were superior to us, they hung out with us.
I think that sweetness, though, of his love of creatures is really typical of Bob. My memory of him was his sweetness and his generosity, and he was always happy to greet you when I came. I looked forward to going to Troubadour Book. I went like every 2 weeks for 10 years, and he was like family when I would go, and he was the bookseller of my life. I'm a huge, huge collector of books assembled attached. He was just at my house, and I'm so grateful that we have Sam continuing the legacy in such a beautiful way. But Bobby, I love Bob. He was such a good guy. He was always open. He was always just happy to talk. He told the worst jokes and loved them. And you'd have to suffer them. But yeah, he was a good guy. He was a really lovely man.
And he really liked young people too. I mean, our daughter from an early age, just like your kids, she adored Bob and Tony. You know, it hit her very hard when she heard. But he would engage her, you know, with serious ideas, and he would gift her like boxed sets of world music. You know, at the time when she was just getting into music, and there was that nurturing.
Yeah, I can identify with that. Hi, Tony. My name is Hannah, and I was either in high school or had just gotten out of high school, and I had always been a big reader and did well in English, and I thought I could work at a bookstore, and Troubadour was right around the corner from where I lived. And I walked in and got to know Bob, and he was very, very sweet and very generous, and this was the late 90s when people were just getting the internet. So I ended up starting him selling books online and also working in the store. But sitting around and telling stories on that couch with the coffee table and the cookies and the terrible burnt coffee. And I'm like, 20, hearing his crazy stories of debauchery, just thinking he's God. And going to the Christmas parties.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Man, it was unforgettable. But the generosity, I mean, this is like 20 years ago, he was paying me like $9, $10, $11 an hour, which people don't make now. I mean, and yeah, how you doing, $8.50? But no, I mean, just always very generous with, and took me under Tony too. Bob and Tony took me under their wing and really taught me book selling, and that's how I got to know John and Patty. I would moonlight over at Gabriel Books, and but we kept in touch all these years, and I spent a lot of time with them when Bob was sick recently. And I'm really gonna miss him. I met him at a very sort of pivotal point in my life when I was really looking to expand my horizons and kind of meet new and different people and have a good time. And he was always very generous with me. And I was so green working at the store. But he taught me gradually. I fell into it, but yeah. Those stories and sitting around and drinking that awful coffee, though. I'm going to miss that.
Sam, you could get some crappy coffee and put it over.
Yeah.
I almost bought Dunkin' Donuts coffee for this, and I just couldn't.
You can't.
I couldn't.
Sam's coffee's terrible. I always bring mine out. I'm just gonna say it.
I use Rayo's coffee.
The tradition continues.
One thing I was thinking about earlier from what Andy was saying was, Bob, when was that? I guess it was like 9 years ago. Bob was in the hospital, and he was in terrible shape for like a month and a half, and his mind was gone, and people just thought it was over for him. And then, he got suddenly, I think thanks to something you did, he suddenly recovered, and he moved his books in with my books, and I was helping him set up. And at some point, I was like, where do you want this? And I can't remember who it was, but it was some medieval French theologian, and he corrected my pronunciation of this guy's name. And I'm like, 2 weeks ago you didn't know your own name. And now here you are telling me how to pronounce it, Savigny, whoever it was. That was a weird moment.
No, he was really knowledgeable about books, and he was had an incredible eye. And,
Yeah.
That store was amazing. I mean, I always went left with a stack of books, and he would discount them. But the other thing to remember about Bob too, he was also this patron of artists. There's a very great poet named Bernadette Mayer, who was quite impoverished and had a big library, and she eventually just divested herself of books to Bob. He would pay her enormous amounts of money for these books. I mean, literally way beyond what any bookseller would buy books for, just to support her. And he did that with my brother Michael as well. And he was that was a part of him too, was just to support people who needed help. And I always thought I was like, how does he make any money? So that's also something that was a part of him.
Yeah, I think, there's a joke in the book business, the only way to retire from the book business with a small fortune is to start with a large one. And I think Bob started with a small fortune and left it broke. So it was, yeah, I mean, he did.
The joke that he told me was that, 6 booksellers get stranded on.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Six booksellers get stranded on an island. And somebody says, Saul's got 2 books, that's okay, we'll all make a living.
I think on one of his early cards it said something like outrageously overpaying for books.
Yeah, and of course, being Bob, after he would, and then he'd go through this afterwards. He'd be like, "Oh, I can't believe that guy took advantage of me." Oh. He definitely had his moments of remorse.
You know, Bob had his bookstore back in the day before the internet, or just as we were moving to the internet. And there were people called book scouts back before the internet.
Yeah.
And book scouts would come to Bob's bookstore from England, from California, from all over the world, and spend thousands of dollars, and buy hundreds of books. And
How do
it
you
was
get-
just another era that, you know, it's even hard to imagine anymore.
But how do you get that many books?
Yeah, I thought he bought them all from you.
He had a house full of books.
Well, there's also the story that Bob was an inveterate book buyer. He would get those Daedalus catalogs, which are the remainder catalogs. When he wasn't buying books, he would have the Daedalus catalog, and he would just go checking out 3 copies, 2 copies, 3 copies, and just go through the whole catalog. He just was a book buying machine. He was
Yeah.
always buying books.
Always.
Always.
Because when he was living in the Plain Gardens, okay, and so this would have been back in '89 or possibly before '89, because that's where he was living, you know, at that point. And I would go to his apartment, and I would, you'd be walking. I mean, and this was long before he ever had a bookstore, except that clearly he was preparing. But, you know, same thing. I mean, the breadth not only of his knowledge, that encyclopedic knowledge, but just of his interest. You know, he was just interested in everything and curious about everything, and had to have that book. And look what grew.
Did you know that he was one of the 3 school teammates on It's Academic?
Yes.
No.
Of course, I went,
From our school?
Wow.
He was, like I said,
It's Academic offline is like, yeah, quiz, you know, you have representatives from each of 3 different schools. Yeah.
schools back west. He was already, you know, sort of soaking up everything.
You bet.
Oh, that reminds me, did you know that he had some, I mean, obviously this woman is daft, but a French teacher from when he was, you know who this is?
I may.
From when he was like 10.
Mademoiselle Picard?
Yeah, oui, and she would call here and to ask after him or to talk to him.
Oh, wait, no, that wasn't her.
Oh.
I know who you mean.
This woman who moved to Canada.
Yeah, and she was actually his English teacher, I believe.
Oh, is that right? I think he was
Yeah.
a French teacher.
No, the French teacher is actually one that I remember quite well. And when I went back to see her, she said, "It has been all downhill since you." Since no class.
That's the right thing to say.
But yeah, no, I know, he had this amazing relationship with this teacher who,
Yeah, and who?
Where? From where?
I think from Wilson, I believe.
From Wilson?
I think so.
I mean, he was really young, so it just seems so strange that this woman, to me, you know, still took an interest in him. And you know, Bob, even just one of the last times I saw Bob, he was talking about maybe he would go out and visit her.
Tony will know. She will know who this is better than I.
I mean, he's the only person I've ever known who, if you asked him a question about why he did one thing or another, why he made the decision that he did, he would simply look at me and go, "Because I'm the Bob." But he had a way, because, you know, he had more of that kind of DC/Baltimore accent than I
That's
do.
true. Or than I.
Or than you do. You know, it would come out more as, "Because I'm Bob."
And he did March 1st,
And
That
he
was
did,
his birthday.
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Or I'm the Bob. That was even
I'm the Bob. This has been wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. We learned so much today.
Yeah,
We didn't all
so
know,
many-
putting together the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, the various keyholes.
Yep.
I like, John, when you said that you can't really remove any of the pieces and still have the whole Bob.
Absolutely.
You have to
The
kind of
bad
hold
with the good. You couldn't, if you took away some of the bad, you wouldn't have had the good, you
Or
know.
one of his favorite expressions, you gotta take the bitter with the sweet. Does anyone remember him saying that?
I do.
Yeah, that was an expression he liked.
If anyone hasn't heard Bob playing the harmonica on the video called Polar Vortex, which was, I think, produced when we had the winter a few years ago, that was like a polar vortex with icicles like this. It's just a nice way to remember him.
He's playing with Paul, his friend,
Yeah,
his immigration lawyer friend.
it's just great. That's a wonderful.
Polar vortex.
Polar
Taught me
vortex,
how to
and
yell
it's a
at
wonderful,
football.
so I think you can get it on YouTube.
I think it's on
somewhere.
YouTube.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, it's just wonderful to listen to and remember that part of it.
So play the music.
Well, everybody, there's still some food left. We haven't finished it all.
Tomorrow.
I think we just had a really great time today. I'm glad it just happened the way that it did.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
And see, especially.
Yeah.
John, if you're around and I'm not, this is what I'd like.
Did he scream at someone?
To tell people.
Let's plan ahead, Barbara. I think we're like going to the bail bondsman before the shit hits the fan. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing today.
You don't see them, you see them.
Among the books, anecdotes.
Nice to be with the fellows who get it.
Tony's gonna like this.
So your Bob, somebody that was rather
Get the food?
open, you know, would be telling things about
Hi, Tony.
Patty says Bob was here. I just wanted to get the birds singing. Hi, Bob.